dictionary definition of music is the art of arranging sounds in time through the elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Low Pass Filter is a show about the nature of this thing we call music, how it functions in people's lives, how it's contextualized by society, and why we find certain music meaningful. This is Low Pass Filter. Hello and welcome to Low Pass Filter. My name is Mateo and I'm here as always with Bandon Wayne. Hey Bandon.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. We're outside of the Axis Humboldt Studios, doing it al fresco.
Yeah.
Something
nice.
new. We're not going to sleep in these chairs.
Fresh air this time.
Yeah. So, as always, we go back and forth every month, picking topics. And this month it was my turn to pick a topic, and the topic I picked is who owns music? I mean,
who really owns it?
it? And is it ownable?
Apparently it is.
Apparently it is, at least in a legal sense.
Yes.
But in a moral sense,
Yeah.
does that equate with legal? And as often happens, legal and moral do not intersect all of the time.
Yeah, sometimes the legal side tries to push the moral side, perhaps.
That's right.
To me, it gets pretty philosophical talking about this kind of thing. The rights to control music as an art form, and once it's released into the world, is it still controllable? Do you still maintain ownership once it's out there?
Yeah, and for me, I think there's also a question of what is actually original music.
Yeah.
There are only 7 notes in the Western scale of music. You throw in some half notes in there as well. But that's not a lot of territory to play with. So you're going to have some repeats.
Yeah.
There's about, I'm told, my sources tell me that there's about a little over 4,000 unique chords. And so that sounds like a lot, but really, if you're talking about millions and millions and millions of songs, you're going to have chord progressions that repeat themselves.
Indeed.
And what does that mean for ownership? Does that mean that you've copied somebody?
Yeah. It seems as though the core of what we're getting at this week is that the limitation of the notes and chords in terms of creating completely original work and being distinct from someone else's work. And I think perhaps we're also dealing with sometimes 2 songs may sound like one is completely ripping off the other song, or so inspired by it that it can't help sounding like it. And then the other side would be complete coincidence, totally unintentional, not plagiarism, but unintentionally copying something.
Right. Well, there's a lot of well-worn grooves in the songwriting sphere. And one of those is called the most popular progression in music, which I'm going to throw some musical terms at you. I don't know, maybe there'll be some graphics involved. We'll see if they're necessary or not. But the 1-5-6-4 progression, which often is seen as a C major, G major, A minor, F chord progression, is used in thousands and thousands of songs.
Indeed.
In all kinds of music, from punk to Western music. And if you boil it down to even simpler, you could take out the 6 chord and you could just say the 1, the 5, the 4, the 1, the 4, the 5. Those are used in, there wouldn't be country music really without that chord progression.
Okay. A lot of times we're talking about 3-chord rock and roll riffs.
Yeah.
You play guitar and piano. You have a bit more theory and melody. being a drummer, I never learned as much about that, but I have some intuition about melody. But yeah, so you kind of think of, say Chuck Berry as kind of a bassist, and then, he kind of played those chord progressions in various configurations, but anybody influenced by that is bound to be replicating those chord progressions.
Right. And I'm not saying that, that even the songs that use these chord progressions are not original. I mean, obviously, though, there are lyrical things that are happening, vocal things, and performance things that happened in these songs that makes them subtly different from each other. Yeah. But really, at a base, they're using the same 7 notes, the same 4 chords, over and over and over again, trying to create something new out of that.
Yeah.
But how does that connect up to being an original song that you can own? Because, let's take the blues, for example. Blues players, they really came out of a tradition in the South. So it wasn't so much that they were writing new songs, but there were traditional songs that they would appropriate. So, your average blues player would go to a house party, he'd hear another blues player singing one of his blues songs, and then he would take that song, add his own lyrics, and voila, it's the same. He's got a new song. But really, if you think about the blues, there are really like 3 major forms of the blues. There's the 12-bar blues. There's a couple of other ones that get recycled over and over again. Yeah. You add, different lyrics to it, and different feelings and performances that make them different.
Yeah.
But really, at the base, you're just playing the same old blues riffs that came about, starting in Storyville, back in the turn of the century and moving through the 20s and the 30s and up into the 50s when they became electrified.
Yeah. So in that sense, a repeated chord progression could be the basis or canvas for adding your own lyrical story. And so it didn't really matter if the same basic chord progression was being reused. It was a vehicle to tell your particular story.
Sure.
But I think once some white British rock and rollers got a hold of that stuff and started playing with it, then it started to become maybe an issue of stealing.
Right. Well, because just to do a little bit of history on blues music, it was basically relegated to race music. They called them race records.
Yeah.
And that meant that they weren't sold. You couldn't go to Woolworths and buy them. You had to, bought them. They were in the back room of a country store somewhere. And so, when these white musicians like Elvis, for example, started mining these records, that's when the money started to happen.
Yeah.
And a lot of this thing about ownership and who owns songs and whether they're ownable circles around, I think, to the money. as so many things do.
Yes, indeed, man. Once money's involved.
Yeah.
So what was once just a folk tradition becomes a business.
That's right.
And that's when you start getting into these issues. And then how do you deal with that? Where do you go from there philosophically? And once the era of rock and roll, once the business of selling records came into play, then you want to be your own unique artist because that distinguishes you and helps you sell to a particular audience. And so then you get, well, this artist sounds an awful lot like this artist, and is that cool? Is that not cool?
Yeah, is it conscious or is it unconscious?
Yeah.
Because we all, live in a world where, music is everywhere, and you might have fallen asleep to the Rolling Stones, and then woke up in the next morning with this great song called "Satisfaction" that you that you wrote down, and not without realizing that that had already been done.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the intersection of money and attorneys and all that kind of stuff, and so this is where you get things like the Spirit copyright suit against Led Zeppelin and Stairway to Heaven. And just a little bit of background, in 2014, Randy Wolf, who is, I think, the guitar player for the band Spirit.
Randy California.
Randy, also known as Randy California. Although I don't know why he changed it from Wolf. That's a pretty cool name. I don't know why you have to do that. More letters, it'd be harder to sign autographs. I don't know. Anyway, he claimed that Stairway to Heaven infringed the copyright of a Spirit song called Taurus.
Yeah.
And that got dragged through the courts. I think it initially was found in his favor, and then was appealed and retried. And I think there was 2 or 3 trials for this particular.
Yeah, it seems to me that was a very long-running case about this particular song and Spirit's belief that Led Zeppelin stole that from them. I've listened to it a couple times and didn't seem that obvious to me.
Yeah.
But I think the story goes that the 2 bands played live together before Zeppelin wrote the tune.
Okay.
And so it was believed that Jimmy Page heard that and felt like he could use a little bit of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the suit was ultimately resolved in 2020, and it was found that they had not indeed copied Randy California's song, or Randy Wolf or Spirit song.
Yeah.
So that reinstated a verdict that I guess originally went Zeppelin's way, then went against them, and now it went back to, and I think it's gone up to the Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit.
Wow.
So I think without going to the Supreme Court, that's going to be the end of that whole thing. And of course, Randy passed away. So I think in the course of that, and I think actually his estate took over that suit. But so the thing that Led Zeppelin argued, and that I'm kind of arguing here, is that they use the same chord progression that's been used for 300 years in Western music, and is included in songs like Chim Chimery, from Mary Poppins. Again, it circles back to this, there's nothing new under the sun sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think another thing with that case being a good example is, would the group Spirit have necessarily been more successful had Led Zeppelin not written that song? Would Led Zeppelin ultimately still have been a more successful band? I think so.
Yeah.
They had a body of work that just became more popular, probably a greater body of work than Spirit. So, if it comes down to money, is the group Spirit just upset that they didn't earn as much money as Led Zeppelin?
Well, obviously, circling back to the money again, that's a huge payday because of the popularity of the song Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah.
Just go into any guitar shop and listen to somebody testing out a guitar, and you'll see that the influence of that.
Yeah, that song did have a huge impact on music moving forward. Another thing is it's not the first time Jimmy Page or Led Zeppelin have been accused of taking from other artists.
That's right.
Particularly the original blues artists that they were influenced by, without giving any credit whatsoever.
Yep.
The actual obvious, deliberate pieces of original blues tunes that were incorporated into some of Zeppelin's early works. But again, it's an argument that will probably continue on for a long time, whether or not they appropriated something in a dishonest way,
or did they appropriate from the appropriators? Because if you think about it, the blues artists in question in those songs also appropriated their material from other blues artists.
So, yeah.
You get into the racial thing of these white artists came in and appropriated, in quotation marks, blues music from black artists, but of course the black artists were doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, was Howlin' Wolf playing his completely own original stuff that Zeppelin then took from. Yeah.
Yeah, I would argue that no. I mean, was Howlin' Wolf unique? Was he awesome?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll talk a little bit about, as we go along, about what constitutes original works and how they are acquired by the people that acquire these works. And by people, I mean corporate people, not actual people that are walking around on two legs. So another famous suit, and I guess this would be a good point to mention that if you want to check out these songs and see if you think they're similar, as a lot of people do, we both have our playlists, Spotify playlists that are listed below in the doodly-doo below us.
Yeah, we tried to pick out some good examples of songs that exemplify this idea we're talking about.
Yeah, so you can check it out and see if you think they sound alike too. So the other big suit was the George Harrison "My Sweet Lord" suit from All Things Must Pass, "My Sweet Lord," which was a huge hit for George, coming out of the Beatles, his first solo record. Yeah. He was then sued by Ronnie Mack, who wrote the song "He's So Fine," which was a hit for the Chiffons in 1963. And in this case, it didn't work out so good for the Quiet One. He actually was found to have plagiarized that song, either consciously or unconsciously.
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with this case.
Yeah.
I know the song by the Chiffons. Honestly, not as familiar with the George Harrison, although that is a great record. And I do love selections from it.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think George Harrison would know better than to directly plagiarize another song. Although all four of the Beatles, or at least the principal songwriters in the Beatles, were clearly influenced by so much else.
Right.
And the majority of their early recordings are other people's songs.
Yeah.
But George Harrison is clearly a unique musical artist.
Yes.
So.
Well, he claimed that he did in fact plagiarize a song, that he used an out of copyright Christian hymn called "Oh Happy Day" as his inspiration for that melody.
Okay.
So he claims that, well, yes, I did quote unquote, air quotes, plagiarize a song, but it was something that he, that was in public domain, that he had a perfect right to reuse, recycle.
Yeah. And so therefore the Chiffons song could possibly be based on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he was going with that.
Yeah.
Didn't work out for him.
That's too bad. In that case, it really does seem like it comes down to litigating for the sake of getting that payday.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are what I like to call copyright trolls that really will go and just start looking through music and look for things that are similar, and then convince somebody to sign up for a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And then sue on that basis.
There's a whole lawyer world.
Yes, there is.
Drumming up lawsuits.
Right. They say everyone hates an attorney until you need one.
Yeah, kind of like when they would, chase traffic accidents.
That's right.
Like that,
Except they don't have to get up out of their chair for this one. They sit in front of their computers.
Poor George, that's too bad.
Yeah. Well, you can't feel too awfully sorry for him. I guess he was in, one of the biggest
for sure
groups. One of the fun things about doing a show outside is now it's raining.
Yeah. How heavily is it going to rain on us?
I guess we'll see.
Oh man. I can handle a certain amount of it.
Right. Well, this might be a natural spot for us to take a break and duck under cover for a minute or two and see if it's going to clear up. We'll be right back with some more low-pass filter in just a minute. And we're back. It stopped raining.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just saying as we were standing off camera and under cover that Murphy's Law. You do shoot outside, it starts to rain. Yeah. Even if there's only one little cloud in the sky, it comes over.
Somebody coined the term for a reason.
That's right.
Well,
so we've been talking about lawyers. We've been talking about money and music, and so the question arises: who actually owns music? And are they good stewards in their ownership of music? Most of the music that you listen to every day is owned by three corporations. Sony Music Group, Sony Music, and Warner Music Group. And these three companies make $1.7 million an hour off of music revenues.
Just all day, every day.
All day, every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's well, see, actually, I've got two things here. One says that they make $2 million every single hour. Oh, that was in 2019. So, I guess probably in the 3 years, they're probably even making more. Because if you think of all, the Spotify situation, other outlets for music that have kind of popped up in the last few years, there's more opportunities for the money to come rolling in.
Yeah.
And, combined with the fact that they're making the money and the artists involved are probably not making it at the same rate as they are. Generally, when an artist signs a recording contract, let's just say something about copyright law, and that is that there are two kinds of copyrights. There are the songwriter's copyright, and then there's the performance rights for those songs.
Yeah.
And so they each earn royalties.
Yeah, so I think that's copyright of the work and then publishing rights for the songwriters.
That's right.
And so in the sense of a band, the whole band will earn money for the recorded work, but one or two of the people may be the principal songwriters, and they'll have their own separate royalties for that, which often causes issues within a band as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times these people are young and hungry when they sign their first recording contract, and they often don't have an attorney, or they have an attorney that poorly understands the dynamics of signing a contract. Things like who ends up owning the masters, for how long. They often don't understand that even things like recording costs, things associated with making the record, are deducted right off the top before they make a single dime of that money back. And so let's just say these work out favorably in the case of most corporations, as opposed to the artists themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably become a little bit easier in the modern digital world to create your own path to having some monetary success without the need of basically investors to help you get your recording made and get promoted and stuff like that. However, there's a lot more people in that ocean, and the audience that you have is kind of divided up much more than it may have been if you were promoted by a big record label. So, it's a different world and different ways to go about it. So there's kind of pros and cons to that. But in some ways, perhaps you may have less debt to your backers.
Well, I would posit that it's not good when three corporations own most of popular music.
Yeah.
And when they have a lot of money, they're making a lot of money, and then they can use that money to hold on tighter to the music itself.
Yeah.
The other day I did an Instagram post of mine. I have an old record player. You kids, you can ask your elders what those are.
It's the hand crank one, right?
Well, not quite that old, but pretty old. But anyway, I was just showing that we were out on our deck and we'd set it up and we were listening to music out in the afternoon. From a distance you could hear what was playing on the record, and I got a copyright strike on Instagram. They took my post down.
Of course. Yeah.
Almost immediately.
Wow.
So not even a little snippet of, and I think we're talking, the music in question was, might have been like a Jackie Gleason record. It was like, it was not like, it wasn't Beyonce,
Wow.
but so even your personal use and ownership of the music.
Yeah.
You sell physical media. And so, a lot of ways, that's the only way you really own music anymore. Because if you have digital copies, if you have a Spotify, if you have an iTunes library, that's all subject to that long thing that they make you click on before you can use their devices.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point that is another example tying into the concept that you brought up this month, because on physical albums there is usually a statement expressing that you do not have, even though you've paid to buy the record, you do not have the right to publicly disseminate the sounds from that record. You're not allowed to do what they would call a public performance with it. And working in the record store years back, I learned that the record store itself is one of the only places that is exempt from copyright infringement by playing records in your retail space. So if you're another type of retail store, a clothing store, this comes into question a lot with bars, venues, you have to pay the man.
Right. ASCAP, are you out there?
Yeah, you have to pay them in order to play that. If you're a clothing store or a restaurant, it's considered an enhancement of your ambiance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not free. You can't just choose to play whatever you want. It's considered public performance, and you have to pay ahead of time to have the license to do that. A record store is exempt because we're promoting the music sales.
You're selling their stuff.
I would not be surprised, though, if they wanted to, they could find a way to come after you.
Don't give them any ideas.
No. But another thing that kind of ties into that, and I remember in the mid-'90s, mid to late 90s, Garth Brooks, who was at the time one of the biggest selling artists of all time, he may still be one of the biggest selling artists, he did not like record stores reselling used copies. He claimed that
he should get paid again.
Yeah, he should get paid again for having those resold. And, that is kind of a weird, nebulous situation there. That you're selling commodity. You're selling something. It's not necessarily the new licensed manufactured copy. So it becomes a second-hand thing. So a record store that sells new and used is kind of in a dual business, but it's all.
Well, then you kind of have the other side of that coin, where someone like Taylor Swift, had her music transferred from one corporation to another. She was not happy about that. I think she tried to get her masters back. I don't think she realized at the time that she didn't have control of those.
Right.
And this is what the impetus of her going out and re-recording records. So she got it right the second time.
Her only choice was to re-record them.
Right.
Interesting.
In order to get back the ownership of that, or at least some of the ownership of that. So, but one of my things about corporate ownership is that they're not particularly good stewards of the music that they have. And the thing I like to point to is the 2008 Universal Studios fire on the back lot, which destroyed, because all of this music had been gathered up by Universal Music, consolidated. It was all brought to one location, or most of it was brought to one location. And the predictable thing happens, just like raining on a TV production, is a worker with a blowtorch heated something up and then went off and left for the day, and the vault burned down. In a confidential memo, UMG has asserted that 500,000 song titles went up in smoke, including some of the most iconic music in the world. I just go down the list of a few of them because it's really jaw-dropping to look at what was lost. But Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Judy Garland, Patsy Cline, all of Chuck Berry's masters were lost. Even things that multi-track masters of songs that had not been yet recorded. Chess Records, virtually the entire catalog of Chess Records went up in smoke. Howlin' Wolf, Willie Dixon, Bo Diddley, Etta James, John Lee Hooker, and most of John Coltrane's Impulse masters were also lost.
Yeah.
And things like Rock Around the Clock, the masters for that, Rocket 88, The Impressions, People Get Ready, all went up in smoke because the music was. Because Universal Music Group, frankly, was not a good steward of the music. Sure, yes, they were great at making money off of the music, but they were pretty terrible at making sure that it was there for the rest of us to listen to. And the loss is incalculable. We're talking about stuff that we'll never hear, that was unreleased, that now we'll never hear, we'll never know anything about it. And so this is kind of to my point of what happens with consolidation of a lot of things, airlines and what have you, but especially in the music realm, can have really tragic consequences.
Yeah, that is really tragic. It does perhaps legitimize digital transcriptions of I prefer analog copies. Because I do think there could be issues with digital as well.
Oh yeah.
You could have servers wiped out. The quality can be degraded in some ways from the analog, but you can save things in a virtual way and avoid a natural disaster like that. Except for a solar flare, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, it sounds kind of like what you're talking about with that. Sort of a mismanagement, perhaps.
Absolutely.
The money is more important than actually caring for this work, and perhaps not enough care and focus was put on where do we store these. They will be completely safe. It's almost like I own all this stuff, and I'm just going to shove it in the closet here.
Right. It's the old all your eggs in one basket scenario. Well, it's come about time for us to take another break. We're going to go away for a minute. We'll come back with some more La Paz Filter. Welcome back to Low Pass Filter. We're talking about who owns music, if it's ownable. Well, we know that it is. We know that legally it is, but morally, it's another question entirely.
Yeah.
So let's dive into our list.
Yeah.
Talk about that stuff that
It's a good
is said
time.
to sound a lot alike.
Yeah.
So what do you have?
Well, I started off, if I'm going down my list, I started off with a song and a legal situation that I just find hilarious because it involves the same artist being considered to have plagiarized their own work, which is John Fogerty being sued by Fantasy Records. The original song by Creedence Clearwater Revival was Run Through the Jungle,
Right.
and Fantasy claimed that his solo song, Old Man Down the Road, was a plagiarism. And I mean, also because John Fogerty is always going to be John Fogerty, and he has a pretty consistent songwriting style.
Yes.
Not that it gets boring and repetitious, but you just can't take the Fogerty out of Fogerty.
Right.
So,
And
pretty
we should
frivolous
mention
song.
too that there's no love lost between Fantasy Records and John Fogerty.
Okay, well that's good.
Yeah, they've had a litigious history, and I think he tried to get his CCR stuff back, claiming that he had sole ownership of it. Didn't work out for him. So there's
Yeah. That's a silly situation. And then I had Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve, which was indirectly using a piece of Rolling Stones material from, what was it, The Last Time. This will be the last time.
right.
But The Verve sampled from an orchestral piece of music doing the Rolling Stones tune. So there again, who owns that?
Right.
Apparently the Rolling Stones did, because they sued the pants off of The Verve and took all of the future earnings that song would have. Any money generated from the performance of that song, whether in a commercial or a movie or on the radio, would go to the Rolling Stones.
That's not nice.
No,
That's not
no. I think the Rolling Stones were a little harsh on that, but maybe they were just letting their lawyers go to town.
Again, the lawyers, the money, the people that own the copyrights are probably have something.
I always had this impression that Mick Jagger would somehow be that kind of guy, though, because he did go to law school, I believe, when he was young, and I'm sure the Stones, or he went to business
London School of Economics.
Yeah, business school, not law school, but yeah. So,
Yeah, he is a really great businessman.
Yeah,
There is
so-
no question about that.
So you figure he's going to make the most money he possibly can. But I don't know if he's that mean of a person. Anyway, recently,
Mick, we love you.
recently, apparently that was sort of overturned or renegotiated, and now the Verve will get to make some royalties off of that piece of music.
Good for them.
Because it really, I think, it exemplifies the idea of borrowing, recontextualizing, and creating a whole new piece of music out of it. They did use someone else's work, but they made something new. It
Yes.
wasn't just copying that song and not crediting. They took it from someone else.
They didn't change it to "This will be the first time,"
It
and
was
claim
the
that that
last-
was.
It was the last time for the verb for that.
Well, here's another one of these court cases that's been fairly recent, and that is the Blurred Lines "Got to Give It
Yeah.
Up" court case. Blurred Lines, of course, by a guy named Robin Thicke, and "Got to Give It Up" Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
I think Robin got his pantsuit off, so now he's walking around in shorts.
I'm a little more biased towards Marvin Gaye in that situation. I really didn't follow the Robin Thicke thing. I wasn't listening to his music.
Yeah, me neither.
So, yeah, I don't know.
His dad was on a sitcom, that's all I know.
Yeah.
The other one I had, this one is fairly obvious, I think, but there was never any lawsuits over it, but Sweet Little 16 by Chuck Berry and Surfin' USA. I mean, very,
Yeah.
they sound very much alike. And again, just remind you that we've got these songs in our Spotify playlist. You can check them out.
Yeah, definitely check them out. That one's a little tough for me because obviously Chuck Berry preceded the Beach Boys, and there wouldn't be a Beach Boys without those early rock and rollers. But the Beach Boys were so in the tradition of that, and you know, I think at that time the nucleus of what they were all doing was so much more current. You know, they were all coming from the same place.
Yeah, and I think, the scope of rock and roll at the time was narrower.
That's what I'm getting at. I guess.
Yeah.
What can you do with these?
Yeah,
these chords?
Captain Beefheart hadn't come along yet, so nobody had blown the place wide open.
Yeah.
So, the idea that, hey, it's a 3-chord rock and roll song, and, all the kids are doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, they idolized Chuck Berry. They were one of his heroes. You could see where that would happen.
Brian Wilson clearly went on to be a very uniquely artistic
yeah.
songwriter. And as you said, all the kids are doing it. Like, think of how many songs different artists were doing that were based on dances at the time.
Yeah.
It seems a little over the top to go after them for that. But
Yeah, I don't think there was any case. They never. Again, a lot of this all happened before music and legal things really got onto steroids. Really, which kind of sort of happened in the '80s. Is really when post home taping is killing music. Happened. So in the early '60s, mid to early '60s, when that all happened, there really wasn't the legal appetite to do that.
Yeah.
To sue on that basis. So that one kind of got grandfathered in, I guess, if you will.
yeah, and they were all selling records to the teenagers like crazy, so they were all pretty happy.
Yeah.
Pretty content with the money that was rolling in.
What else do you have?
Here's one I need to even listen to more. This just recently came to my attention as I was going to see Joe Satriani live with a friend, and apparently he sued Coldplay over this song called "Viva La Vida" by Coldplay.
Vaguely familiar with that.
Yeah, I love Satriani. I'm familiar with a lot of his work, but I would not have known that he believed Coldplay stole his melody. And it also seems kind of odd that Coldplay would
Even know
refer to Joe Satriani for
Yes.
an influence.
I'm just barely aware of he's sort of Guitar Hero sort of guy. Is he not?
He very much, in the vein of Steve Vai,
Right.
post Eddie Van Halen and stuff like that. Just would his stuff be on their radar, and subconsciously they assimilated some melody he created into one of their songs? I don't know, but I think he won.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right. Well, he had the better attorneys, maybe.
I suppose so. Let's drop this one, because this one, I can't imagine that Kurt Cobain would have thought he could get away with stealing somebody's melody, or would even have felt good about doing that. And he was pretty aware of his influences. So the song "Come As You Are" people thought sounded so close to 80s by Killing Joke, which is Killing Joke's most commercially successful song. The chord progression is very similar. The main verse riff in Come As You Are is very similar to the Killing Joke song, but I would think that Kurt would be aware enough.
Yeah, or would he? Or would he even think about it? Would it even occur to him, really?
Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he did have kind of a similar flangey filter on the guitar. But I would think that he liked Killing Joke, probably.
Yeah.
Looked up to them. But I don't think he would have...
Consciously. Well, again, that comes back to this whole unconscious thing. We're all influenced by things, everything we hear. I'm a songwriter myself, not a very high renowned, shall we say. I've probably written 50 or 60 songs in my life. I don't feel like I ever had an original thought in my entire life.
That's an interesting perspective to have.
Well, I mean, it's not like I set out to steal anything from anybody, but there are songwriters and songs and feelings and things that I admire, and then I would consciously incorporate those kind of feelings and is that stealing? I mean, it's the milieu, the sea that I swam in as I grew up listening to music. I mean, how can that not come out in something that anyone writes? The songwriters of the 50s, or owe something to the songwriters of the 30s. This is kind of what I'm getting to. My premise or my thesis for this particular show is that how can anything be original unless you dropped it from Mars?
I think
you picked up a Casio keyboard and start whipping out songs, right? I mean, you everything that you do in this world really is a result of what is built upon what happened in the past.
Yeah, there are, I would say, a minority of popular musical artists who somehow seem to be coming from their own sort of otherworldly space. Like, how did they arrive at this sound? The influences would be hard to narrow down. Does that make them more interesting, more lovable than an artist who clearly wears their influences on their sleeve? Or if you really analyze their music, you can start to pull out, just like a painter who is original, that they've got techniques from other painters.
Yes.
And obviously, like we were talking
about.
Well,
they're like using a brush.
Oh, you use a brush?
Right. Why don't you? I was the first person to use a brush. You're stealing from me.
Yeah, I mean, and so like we talked about at the top of the hour, those chord progressions they're floating around out there, and it would be hard to come up with completely original chord progressions. The guitar only has so many strings and frets. The piano only has so many keys. A reed and your breath and aperture only has so much capability of doing certain things with it. So that's kind of the core premise of what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the legal side of it, but
well, I guess just to put a finer point on it is like if nothing really or the pool of things that are absolutely original is actually pretty small.
Yeah.
If you listen to popular music of the last 50 years, really everything owes something to everything else.
Yeah.
So in that case, and if you could successfully sue people for that, like George Harrison, then why isn't everyone going after everyone else? Because really, everything owes something to everything else.
And I think another point to add to that, I might be jumping around here, but when two things are very similar, and there could be the debate as to one stole from the other, then you also have the element of what the audience chooses. You know, your song sounds like somebody else's song, but the audience likes your song better.
Right.
You know, that to my mind, that's democracy right there. You know,
Right, but that's also the point where it becomes important to the attorneys.
yeah,
Because if no one's listening to your song
Yeah,
that sounds
yeah.
like "She's So Fine," he's so that they're probably not going to come after you. But
Yeah.
once you start making money off of it, yeah.
Another thing I was going to add to what you were talking about, in the 80s when the artist Enya hit this moment of sort of mainstream popularity.
For 15 minutes.
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with her. I was much younger. I was in my early to mid-teens. But she said something in an interview that kind of blew my mind a little bit. I didn't know how credible it really was, but she said that she does not listen to anyone else's music whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I assume that meant she isolates herself from other music so that she can be truly original, so that her ideas, her thoughts can be truly original. She obviously lived a life up to that point. I'm sure she absorbed lots of music.
She obviously didn't go into any supermarkets or ride any elevators.
Come on now. Yeah, completely. She took the stairs always, but she somehow tapped into the market there.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Well, we just got a couple minutes here left. I'll just run through the last two that I have, and we both have. Well, this is one we both have, which is "All Day and All the Night"
Yeah.
by the Kinks,
Yeah.
and "Hello, I Love You" by the Doors. Ray Davies, in his inimitable fashion, claimed that Robbie Krieger ripped him off totally, and there are similarities to the song. And then another one that I had was 25 or 6 to 4 by Chicago, and a song by Green Day called Brain Stew.
yeah, that one was completely off my radar. I really dig that Chicago song.
Yeah,
Don't know
great song.
Don't know the Green Day song, and that seems like a weird.
It's remarkably similar.
Weird. Well, I guess I can see Green Day digging on the Chicago.
Yeah.
I guess that's not too far out there. I don't really want to end on this note, but one other one I had on my list that I just think is kind of funny, kind of absurd, is "I Want a New Drug" in Ghostbusters.
Okay.
Ray Parker Jr. Really felt that Huey Lewis was stealing from him. He wrote "I Want a New Drug."
Right. Well, you can listen and decide for yourselves.
Yeah.
So much, and as we've said in this show before, so much of music is subjective. What you feel, what you hear, what you take away from it might be different than what somebody else does.
There was a quote by one or both of the members of the group Negativland who have notoriously been involved in legal suits over plagiarism, but they purposefully were trying to shine a light on what they thought was an absurd sort of legal mindset in regard to that. And I don't know if this applies to everything we're talking about today, but
We're going to get a copyright strike on that.
sorry. Okay. The quote was, "If you don't want anyone to do anything with your art, keep it in your living room."
Yeah. Words to live by. Well, that's going to just about do it for this installment of Low Pass Filter. Be sure and like and subscribe. Tell a friend about the show.
Please do.
And Bandon, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
We're dry now.
Yeah.
It stopped raining.
Yeah.
The sun came out, and soon the birds will be singing. And as long as those birds don't copy anybody, they'll be in good shape.
Yeah.
So we'll see you next time on Low Pass Filter.
Thanks for watching Low Pass Filter. You can contact the hosts at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified about future shows.